Hello and welcome back to another episode of TDNY. This day, not year. The podcast that looks back at the history of the week ahead. Episode 15. Today we'll be looking at April 21st to April 27th. And, along the way, we'll be learning such things as what really lurks beneath the famous Scottish loch? Why the US president goes through 30,000 eggs over Easter? Which country drinks the most beer? And how you could be related to a serial killer. Plus a whole lot more along the way, as well as our usual song pairings for each story, which surely we're building up quite a musical repertoire by now. We also have the dreaded quiz, making an appearance at the end of the episode. So pay attention throughout, as we start off with Monday, 21st of April. On this day, not year, a photograph saw all eyes lock towards Scotland. Saint Columba was born in Ireland in 521 AD. At age 42, he travelled to Scotland as a diplomat and also to spread his religion of Christianity. 2 years later, 565 AD, as he was crossing the River Nessa, he witnessed a man being buried. The man had been seized by a beast while swimming, killed before he could be saved by his companions nearby. On hearing this, Columba ordered his disciple, Lugne, into the river for a swim. Sure enough, the waters soon parted as a beast rose, darting towards Lugne. "Thou shalt go no further, nor touch that man. Go back with all speed," Columba cried, and the beast, the monster, did just that. Repelled backwards as if dragged by invisible ropes. This, according to many, is the first recorded sighting of what has since been classified as Nessiterus rhomboteryx, perhaps better known as the Loch Ness Monster. However, it wasn't the most famous sighting. The surgeon's photograph, taken in 1934, spread like wildfire when it was sold for £100 and published by the Daily Mail on this day, April 21st, shortly after being taken the week prior. It came at a time of what can only be termed Nessie mania. A road around the loch had been recently finished in early 1933, and gave pedestrians better access and views of the large freshwater lake than ever before. With this ease of access came a spate of monster sightings. The first, which seemed to ignite the public's imagination around the loch and its inhabitant, came from a sighting in May 1933 that was published in a local newspaper. The creature disported itself, rolling and plunging for fully a minute, its body resembling that of a whale. With the next sighting coming 2 months later, from Mr. and Mrs. Spicer, as they were driving around the loch, when they reported a large animal, over 1 metre tall and 7 metres long, cross the road in front of them before plunging into the 6 degrees Celsius, or 42 Fahrenheit, water. The Spicers described it as the nearest approach to a dragon or prehistoric animal that I have ever seen in my life. And once again their sighting was printed in newspapers and spread around the world. "The Bunyip of Loch Ness," declared one Australian newspaper. "Loch Ness mystery, strange monster seen," printed another. "Is this the Loch Ness Monster?" one asked, cementing its new moniker. Wanting definitive proof, the London-based Daily Mail hired big game hunter Mr. Marmaduke Arundel Wetherell, an expert on tracking animals, a skill he had honed in Africa. This was a step too far for many in Scotland, as the Secretary of State had to issue a warning that if the creature was seen, it must not on any pretext be molested, shot, or trapped, a threat backed up by the local police force. Fortunately for Marmaduke, he never encountered the monster face to face. But he did discover some mysterious footprints he declared belonged to the animal. Unfortunately for him, his time in Africa obviously hadn't stuck, as the footprints, once studied closer, were found to have come from a hippopotamus. Well, one leg of a hippo, anyway. It was concluded to either be the base of an umbrella stand or an ashtray made from a stuffed hippo foot, an error that seemingly tarnished Marmaduke Wetherell's reputation. Which brings us back to 1934, and the photo printed on this day by the Daily Mail. It has since come to be known as the surgeon's photograph, as the one who took it, a London-based gynecologist, Robert Kenneth Wilson, didn't want his name attached to it. The photo itself, as per a 1934 London newspaper cable, shows a snake-like neck and a small head resembling a sea serpent. For quite a while, the photograph offered the best proof of the monster's existence, spurring on countless searches of the 230-metre or 755 feet deep loch, with ever-advancing technologies and numerous scientific and cryptozoological organisations scouring the waters in search of it. The only issue with all of this? The surgeon's photograph was faked. Although Robert Kenneth Wilson submitted the photo to the Daily Mail, he hadn't been the one to take it. No, that honour went to a different group. Maurice Chambers, Christian Sperling, and the father and son duo of Ian Cullen Wetherell and his father, Marmaduke Arundel Wetherell. The monster had actually been a toy submarine with the head and neck sculpted out of wood putty. Rather than a metre tall and several metres long, this monster was only around 60 to 90 centimetres or 2 to 3 feet long. After several photos were quickly snapped, fearing they would be discovered, the sculpture was sunk to the bottom of the lake. Then Marmaduke had his last, private, laugh at the Daily Mail, as they printed his faked images for the world to see. It wasn't until decades later, in 1994, that the truth would come to light, well after both Wetherells had passed away. My song pairing for this story was released 34 years after the surgeon's photograph, and while it isn't a retelling of the story, it does seem to capture how Marmaduke Wetherell must have felt, keeping his deception private for the rest of his life. The Fool on the Hill by the Beatles. Tuesday, 22nd of April. On this day, not year, the start of an egg-cellent and egg-sighting tradition. Have you ever wondered why we eat chocolate eggs at Easter? Well, the chocolate part is just because it's tastier than trying to eat an actual eggshell, but it's the egg itself that is symbolic. The shells represent the empty tomb that, as per legend, Jesus had risen from after his 3-day stint post-cross. As per Anne Jordan from her book Christianity, the Easter egg is a reminder that Jesus will rise from his tomb and bring new life. Or, from an 1878 article from The Guardian, thus you see that though an egg seems to be as dead as a stone, yet it really has life in it. And also it is like Christ's dead body, which was raised to life again. This is the reason we use eggs on Easter. There is also an association from the goddess Eostre, and her symbolic use of eggs to represent new life and fertility, but that's an appropriation story for another day. Why are we talking eggs today? Well, we're just coming off Monday the 21st of April, which also happened to be Easter Monday, which means a tradition that started back on this day in 1878 is going to take place in America, the White House Egg Roll. An event that sees hundreds of children throughout the day roll a hard-boiled egg along a racetrack, aided by a long-handled wooden spoon to direct and accelerate the eggs along. This is a sport that dates back hundreds of years and could be found practiced around the world. As just one example, in England since the 1500s, it has been called pace egging, coming from an old name for the Jewish Passover. The eggs would be decorated by being boiled wrapped in onion skins, leaving patterns and mottling on the surface. Other variations of the egg roll may have evolved from a traditional Scottish Easter tradition of rolling oatcakes down a hill. Here the eggs are rolled down any suitably sloped surface, with the egg not only needing to get from the top to the bottom fastest, but also to do so shell intact. A version not without controversy, as the White House winner in 1971 was found to be doping, in a way, and actually rolled down a painted stone on the White House lawns instead of an egg. Today, the White House event also features many other attractions, including egg hunts and other activities, bands, stories read by celebrities, an appearance from the President and First Lady, other politicians, and even the Easter Bunny. If you ever want to get in on the fun, you need just two things: a child under the age of 13, and luck. Owing to the popularity of the event, participants are determined through a lottery. Although numbers fluctuate, depending on weather and other external factors, since at least 1938, crowds of between 30 to 40,000 people have been drawn to the event each year. The event can be cancelled altogether though, something that has happened a few times since 1878, either from world wars, food shortages, or pandemics such as COVID. To help corral the attendees, over 1,000 staff are needed to keep things running smoothly. 40,000 people attended in 2024, and 30,000 eggs have been prepared for the 2025 egg roll. Perhaps to help cover the rising cost of eggs, the 2025 egg roll will also be the first to offer paid sponsorships from companies, with some shelling out up to $200,000 to brand areas of the White House lawns in corporate logos. Prior years, the event has been privately funded or funded by the American Egg Board. How did all this get started? Well, some trace the event back to Abraham Lincoln and his children in the 1860s, while others date egg-rolling events back even further, to the early 1800s, where parks around Washington would be used. Eventually, by the 1870s, the most popular park for rolling was outside the US Capitol building. However, after the Easter of 1876, the grounds were left in a state of disrepair. With Easter often coinciding with the rainiest season of Washington, the wet, muddy grounds would be ruined by the amount of foot traffic. So, Congress, with an already diminished landscaping budget, passed a legislation in 1876 banning egg rolling on the Capitol grounds. 1877 was rained out entirely, but come this day, April 22nd, 1878, children were looking for a new area to roll. According to the whitehouse.gov website, in 1878, a group of bold children walked up to the White House gate, hoping to be allowed to play egg-rolling games there. President Hayes told his guards to let the children enter, and soon Easter Monday in the White House grounds became an annual tradition. While usually this is a fun and family-friendly event, it isn't always a safe one. As per a 1931 article from the New York Times, Samuel Jackson, aged 10, slipped on the grass as he was running after a rolling egg, fell, and broke his arm. And not every occupant of the White House is a fan of the event either. First Lady Edith Roosevelt reportedly left complaining about the smell of the broken eggs permeating the lawns after the events were held. Sometimes hard-boiled, sometimes runny. Comes from a chicken, not a bunny, dummy. My song pairing for this story is the song Eggman by the Beastie Boys. Wednesday, 23rd of April. On this day, not year, Germany was brewing up something new. Beer, as per our friend Wikipedia, is an alcoholic beverage produced by the brewing and fermentation of starches from cereal grain, most commonly malted barley, although wheat, maize, rice, and oats are also used. While Ralph Steadman, in his book Still Life in a Bottle, states, beer brewing goes back beyond the 5th dynasty, 2500 BC, when wheat and barley loaves were fermented in water. As per the Beer Consumption by Country 2025 article on the worldpopulationreview.com website, Australia ranked 15th in the world for beer consumption, drinking some 2.3 million tonnes per year, with the top 5 countries being, in order, China, the United States, Brazil, Mexico, and Russia. However, it is the 6th-placed Germans that concern us today. But first, a quick aside that will become relevant soon. Beer, much like other alcohols, has a diverse number of styles. From beers brewed with lavender, honey, and fruits, to other styles using smoked grains, salt, and other herbs, and even beers that are far from vegan-friendly, made from bacon, oysters, or even chicken. The point I'm making here is that beer is a very varied product, thought to have over 100 different styles around the world. However, it was in Germany, or more specifically the now German state of, but then Holy Roman Empire state, of Bavaria, when, on the 23rd of April 1516, that William IV introduced a ruling that would outlaw the production of many of the outlandish styles listed above, and even some of the more common styles today. This was the Reinheitsgebot, or purity law, which stated, the only ingredients used for the brewing of beer must be barley, hops, and water. Anyone that has brewed beer before may be noticing a 4th crucial ingredient that was left off, yeast. Without this, the 3 ingredients above would just make a soggy stew. The yeast is needed to kick off fermentation and start converting the sugars into alcohol. Yeast was known about by 1516, although according to some, it wasn't until our friend from last episode, Louis Pasteur, came around that its role was fully understood. It is thought its exclusion from the list was due to yeast from one batch being used as the starter for the next beer batch brewed, and it would be akin to listing the brewing equipment itself in the law. Speaking of the law, what of those that broke it? What punishment would they face? Well, whosoever knowingly disregards or transgresses upon this ordinance shall be punished by the court authorities confiscating such barrels of beer without fail. Why was this law, the Reinheitsgebot, introduced? Was it to stop the mad brewers from adding things like bacon and chicken into beer? Well, not entirely. Although the laws may have been created to stop any old plant that may be poisonous or dangerous being used in brewing, if anything, it was more to do with the bakers. Prior to this law, the brewers and bakers were in competition for more sought-after grains, like wheat and rye, a competition that could force the prices for bread and beer up. In fact, the Reinheitsgebot even puts limits on the price that beer could be sold at. From Michaelmas, a Christian festival on the 29th of September, to Georgie, St. George's Day, 23rd of April, one mass of beer, with a mass being 1,069 millilitres, was not to exceed 1 Pfennig Munich value, while between Georgie to Michaelmas, it could be sold for up to 2 Pfennig. Bavaria became part of the German Empire in 1871, but kept the Reinheitsgebot, as part of their conditioning of joining. In fact, soon after, Germany began implementing their own beer purity laws. Although these were a little looser than that of Bavaria, finally allowing for yeast, but also changing ingredients depending on the style of brewing that was being used, and detailing a greater use of sugars for the yeast to ferment off. While today many breweries in Germany still follow the Reinheitsgebot rules, others are starting to branch out with different styles, ingredients and methods. Although by law these often can't be called beer, instead having to be labelled as their new style. My song pairing for this story comes from the 1954 movie, based on the 1924 operetta, The Student Prince, in which, as per IMDb, a brash young prince of a small German kingdom must choose between his romance with a barmaid and his impending royal duties. The song Drink, Drink, Drink by Sigmund Romberg. Thursday, April 24th. On this day, not year, the Golden State Killer met his match. His GED match. From 1974 to 1986, one man committed a string of atrocities across California. Burglaries, sexual assaults, and murders. So numerous were the crimes that it was at first assumed to be the work of 3 different criminals, each nicknamed by the media. The Visalia Ransacker, the East Area Rapist, or the Ear, and the original Night Stalker. It wasn't until 1997 that DNA testing was able to link many victims and cold cases back to these identities. And then, in 2001, they were linked back to just one individual. The East Area Rapist and original Night Stalker were the same person. Although prior investigations had found many similarities between the modus operandi of these individuals, this was the first definitive proof connecting the crimes and criminal. Before her passing in 2016, crime author and blogger Michelle McNamara was working on a book detailing the crimes this, as of then, unidentified serial killer had committed. In the book, she gave him a final nickname, the Golden State Killer. Since 1986, the crimes of the Golden State Killer had ceased, and the investigation led nowhere. Any suspects having solid alibis or didn't match with the recorded DNA. The killer enjoyed taunting police and victims during his spree, often calling up and boasting of his crimes, or what his intentions were. Gonna kill you. Gonna kill you. Gonna kill you. His final call came in 2001, after the different crimes were linked back to one person. Then, the case went cold again. But that didn't mean people had stopped looking, or that technology would remain the same. Although they have faced much backlash since their launch, with the ethics of using them in criminal investigations still uncertain, autosomal DNA ancestry testing websites, like 23andMe, Ancestry, and Living DNA, offer hope in solving many cold cases. With samples of the Golden State Killer's DNA stored across many locations in California, It wasn't long until a usable sample was found and could be compared against the millions of customers using the DNA testing websites. GED Match, as per their website, is a free DNA comparison and analysis website for people who have tested their autosomal DNA using a direct-to-consumer genetic testing company. It is also responsible for helping track down the Golden State Killer, assisting the investigators in compiling the information, and also providing the evidence that the killer's eye color, based on DNA, would be blue. Of the few people who seemed likely suspects, only one had blue eyes. On this day, April 24th, 2018, 44 years since his crime spree had started, police arrested Joseph James D'Angelo, finding him home alone, a roast cooking in the oven. He lived with his daughter and granddaughter, a family he had started during his 12-year spree as the Golden State Killer. When caught, he was 1 year into his retirement. Originally in the Navy, during his time as a Golden State Killer, he worked as a police officer before being fired for a theft, after which holding down a string of jobs before eventually finding stable work for 27 years as a truck mechanic. Joseph James D'Angelo became the first criminal to be tracked down through publicly submitted DNA to genealogy tracing websites. As per abcnews.go.com, D'Angelo became the first public arrest obtained through genetic genealogy, a new technique that takes the DNA of an unknown suspect left behind at a crime scene and identifies him or her by tracing a family tree through his or her family members who voluntarily submit their DNA to public genealogy databases. Although even then, it isn't as easy as typing in a name and finding the culprit. Investigators still required a lot of legwork in tracking down the Golden State Killer. The GED Match database had traced the DNA back to the 1800s, connecting it to a common great-great-great-great-grandfather. But this also meant 25 family trees, each tree containing thousands of people, which had to be searched. Compared to what was known of the killer, individuals ruled out, or flagged for a more thorough investigation. But eventually this all led down to one name. One man. D'Angelo. He was tailed by police, who collected fingerprints from his car door, and DNA from a discarded tissue, confirming his identity. He was charged with 8 counts of murder upon arrest, with another 4 counts of murder and 13 kidnapping and abduction charges later added. In 2020, at the age of 74, Joseph James D'Angelo pleaded guilty to his crimes and was sentenced to multiple life prison sentences. The song pairing for this story is the song Murder by the Tiger Lillies, although a fair warning for the explicit lyrics, but they unfortunately sum up the 3 personas that made up the Golden State Killer quite well. Friday, April 25th. On this day, not year, my man Friday was introduced to the world. On this day, the novel Robinson Crusoe was published. Okay, just kidding. Although the novel is commonly known as Robinson Crusoe, that isn't the full title. The life and strange, surprising adventures of Robinson Crusoe, of York, mariner, who lived 28 years, all alone in an uninhabited island on the coast of America, near the mouth of the great river of the Orinoco, having been cast on the shore by shipwreck, wherein all the men perished but himself, with an account how he was at last as strangely delivered by pirates, written by himself. For those counting along at home, that's a 69-word title. I'd give you a summary of the book, but fortunately that's kind of already been done. Now, you may be thinking that the book was written by Robinson Crusoe, and is perhaps an autobiography, given that the final line, written by himself, but in reality the book was written by Daniel Defoe. Born 1660 in London, as Daniel Foe, the D added later. He grew up in a turbulent time in London. As a 5-year-old, he witnessed the Great Plague of London, as the bubonic plague killed 70,000. The year after, he survived the Great Fire of London, which may have only killed as few as 8, but left the city decimated, with 15% of the city's buildings burned down. By 32, his prospects as a merchant were perishing, and he declared bankruptcy. By 37, he was writing and releasing works. Far from novels, these were essays and pamphlets, which took a rather critical view of Queen Anne's attempts to stamp out competing religions. Skipping ahead again, it wasn't until Defoe was 59 years old, in 1719, that he released Robinson Crusoe. The impact the novel had on society was immeasurable. By 1720, the book had gone through 4 separate printings, as it kept selling out. While it may be matched today, for many years it was second only to the Bible for a work translated into another language. It even spawned its own genre, known as Robinsonade, which sees the protagonist cut off from civilization, fending for their own survival. A genre that is still alive today, as per Andy Weir's 2011 novel, The Martian. Or the 1964 movie, Robinson Crusoe on Mars. 96 years after it was first published, it was still a cherished possession, with the following entry appearing in an 1815 edition of the Sydney Gazette. The person who borrowed a book from the eastern of Cambridge Street, entitled Robinson Crusoe, beautifully bound in red morocco, is requested to return the same immediately. No word on if it ever was returned. While 38 years later from that, showing the worldwide appeal the novel was still commanding, the New York Times printed an article titled, "Books We Have Never Outgrown," which goes on, "We have never grown the 1,000th part of an inch out of Robinson Crusoe. He fits us just as well, and in exactly the same way as when we were among the smallest of the small. We have never grown out of his parrot, or his dog, or his fowling piece, or the horrible old staring goat he came upon in the cave, or his rusty money, or his cap or umbrella." All this is to say that Defoe's novel had quite the long-lasting reach. I can even remember squirreling away beneath the covers with a copy when I was just a lad too. But all this does beg the question. Was Robinson Crusoe a real person? Is this tale true? Well, no. Not quite, anyway. Alexander Selkirk, born 1676 in Fife, Scotland, ran off to sea at age 17 to avoid a telling off for what was described as indecent conduct in church. This started his life of professional piracy, but he soon found he wasn't always in the best of company. Full marks for anyone who picked up that little reference I was putting down. It is Tim Curry's only number, after all, but I digress. 1704, Selkirk, under the command of Captain Dampier, had captured a prize ship, but they only looted it and let it go free. A sister ship, under the command of Captain Stradling, took off on its own, and Selkirk went along with it. The ship wasn't in the best condition, and harboured at Robinson Crusoe Island. Okay, that's a bit of an anachronism. It wasn't called that until 1966. For now, it was the Pacific island Mars a Tierra, Spanish for closer to land. Captain Stradling, after a short while, was ready to set off again, but Alexander Selkirk wasn't convinced the ship was seaworthy, and instead claimed he would stay on the island. He was given some provisions, a musket, pots and pans, a knife, some bedding, and a few other items. Then, despite Selkirk's protests, the ship sailed off, only to sink a short while later, killing most on board, with the survivors whisked off to a Spanish prison. So began Selkirk's time alone on the island. A previous failed colony had left the land well stocked with goats, but also rats and cats. Time passed and Selkirk built a hut. As clothes wore away, he replaced them with goat hide, sewn with a nail. Food was plentiful, with goats and crustaceans dotting the island. Like this, 4 years passed, before a friendly ship finally docked on the island again. Alexander Selkirk's return to civilization was a much celebrated event in 1711, as he became an instant celebrity, and books and accounts were written about his time on the island. While it's not known if Daniel Defoe ever met Selkirk, it's hard to say he didn't draw inspiration for Robinson Crusoe from him, a fact many seem to agree with the island he was marooned on changing names to Robinson Crusoe Island, and a statue of Selkirk named Robinson Crusoe, erected in his hometown. Like Robinson Crusoe, it's primitive as can be. My song pairing for this story comes from a television show I've never seen, but I feel is still quite fitting for this story. The Ballad of Gilligan's Island by Dominik Hauser. Saturday, April 26th. On this day, not year, oh, the humanity. If you've ever seen early concepts of flying machines, what I'm about to describe probably isn't all too unfamiliar. The Plasecki PA-97 Helistat was a large 343-foot or 104-metre long helium blimp with 4 helicopter bodies strapped onto the blimp. While this sounds like a crazy contraption straight out of the Wacky Races, what really surprises is the year this machine was made, 1986. And perhaps most surprising of all, the Helistat could fly. For a while, anyway. From the mind of Frank N. Piasecki, head of Piasecki Aircraft, came the Helistat. He had the idea for it back in the 1960s, filing a patent in 1961. But it would be another 20 years before any real work would begin on it. The airship was designed originally to lift up to 25 tons of timber at a time for the United States Forest Service, able to enter forests and collect the lumber without the need for building a path or road first. Although the Army had other visions for this Frank N. Stein's monster of a machine. They foresaw a future where the helicopter-blimp combo could be used to unload a cargo ship without a dock, securing provisions for a beachhead quickly. A 1983 New York Times article titled "Part Airship, Part Copter, All Debatable" stated, "There are those who are critical of the federal government for having given Mr. Piasecki $10.7 million to build a fanciful blimp." David Jolly, Deputy Director of Timber Management in the Forest Service, stated in the same article, "It may look a little crazy, but the potential benefits are worth some risk." Then, on this day in 1986, some $20 million above budget, the Helistat flew, tethered to the ground to prevent it lifting too far or flying off course. All 4 helicopter cabins were crewed, with the back left helicopter providing control for the test. It was a success, taking off from the Naval Air Engineering Station in Lakehurst, the same station that, just 49 years prior, the Hindenburg airship had crashed at. While I can't find any first-hand evidence for this, it seems that many on the Hellistat crew weren't convinced by this test and held their own reservations, secretly referring to the vehicle as the Hindentanic. They may have been right to hold these reservations. Despite going over budget, much of the material used for construction was second-hand, with Mr. Piasecki quoted as saying, "It's all being done with used parts." On July 1st, 1986, the Hellistat would be tested again. Only this time it would live up to the Hindentanic moniker. At 7 p.m. and 40 feet or 12 meters in the air, the vibrations caused by the spinning helicopter rotors become too much, and the back right helicopter falls off, tearing scaffolding with it. Unbalanced, the other 3 helicopters quickly fall too, a blade puncturing the blimp's body on the way down, sending it down after, bleeding helium. 3 of the pilots are injured, but 1 is killed in the crash. The Hellistat program is discontinued, its only prototype destroyed. The first song I could think of for this story, Spinning Wheel by Blood, Sweat and Tears, has a very fitting opening that pairs quite nicely. What goes up must come down. Spinning wheel got to go round. Sunday, April 27th. On this day, not year, one Sultana killed hundreds. Stop me if you've heard this one before. A ship, sailing at night, ignoring safety concerns, has an accident that results in over 1,000 lost lives. Surprisingly, this story isn't about the Titanic, but an earlier disaster that, due to an unfortunate news cycle, didn't get the coverage or recognition it deserved. The year was 1865. The Civil War was ending. Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated just 13 days ago, and the night prior, his assassin, John Wilkes Booth, had been located and killed in a shootout with the army. It was this last story that dominated headlines across most of America, getting front-page coverage in the New York Times. However, it was far from the only newsworthy story on this April 27th. As, unbeknownst to many, in the early hours of this morning, America had just suffered their worst maritime loss-of-life disaster, all stemming from one ship, the SS Sultana. The Sultana was a side-wheel steamboat driven by 4 fire-tube boiler engines, which were needed to power the 3-decked, 79-metre-long, 13-metre wide, or 260 feet long and 70 feet wide, ship along the American rivers, constructed in 1863 and originally intended for cotton transport. It wasn't long, with the war raging on, before the SS Sultana was conscripted as a troop transport and supply vessel. A year later, in 1864, the Sultana was sold to a conglomerate and captained by James Cass Mason. Which brings us to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Communication in this era was far from perfect, especially coming out of war, where communication lines had been severed, either deliberately or during fighting. Captain Mason felt he had to spread the news. A president had just been killed after all. And so, he and his crew of 85 set off down the Mississippi River, spreading the news as they went. It was during this trip that he met Captain Reuben Hatch, who informed Captain Mason that the government was looking for ships to bring Union prisoners of war, freshly liberated from the South, back to northern states and home. The government was even paying per soldier returned, a price of $2.75, although other sources say up to $5, or $8 for officers. Despite the Sultana having a passenger capacity of 376, Captain Mason agreed to take on 1,000 prisoners of war. Knowing his duty and needing the money, Mason was ready to serve. The Sultana, however, was not. A boiler had sprung a leak and needed immediate attention. A proper fix would take weeks and would also mean Sultana and Mason missing out on the government money. So, much like our gallant captain from the Robinson Crusoe story, a temporary fix was deemed good enough, and it could be looked to properly after they'd finished. A chance that never occurred. The prisoners of war started appearing. First, the promised 1,000, and then the number quickly doubled. The Sultana had to squeeze in 2,000 new passengers, on top of the crew, the cargo, and the few paying passengers already on board. The ship ended up carrying over 5 times its passenger capacity. But big wheels keep on turning, the boilers burning, SS Sultana got underway. Disaster struck around 2 a.m. April 27th. The Sultana, already top-heavy when unburdened, was swaying back and forth as the passengers moved across the deck. This had the unfortunate effect of sloshing the water in the boilers back and forth, letting them heat up well beyond normal ranges before the water sloshed back down, evaporating into steam. This wasn't the only factor at play that night. The Mississippi was flooding, as snow melted, pouring into the river, chilling it and increasing the speed of the water. Unfortunately, the Sultana was travelling against the current, Sultana current, and had to stress the boilers further to keep up speed against the water. Finally, the hastily repaired boiler had had enough, and exploded. A domino effect that detonated 2 of the other 3 boilers also. This was catastrophic for the SS Sultana. A hole was ripped in the middle of the ship, toppling the 2 large smokestacks and setting the wooden ship ablaze. Many had been killed in the initial explosion and collapse, and now with the ship on fire, everyone else was at risk. Many, fearing the fire, jumped into the freezing waters. Some attempted to fight the fire, seeing the wind had left the front bow clear, until one of the large wheels of the steamer broke loose, and the ship started drifting around, setting the gathered survivors downwind and directly in the path of the blaze. All told, estimates at the time put the deceased between 1,100 to 1,400, while some modern research places that number even higher, in the 1800s. For comparison, the Titanic, which made the front page of the New York Times, "New liner Titanic hits an iceberg, sinking by the bow at midnight, saw 1,517 people die," while the SS Sultana barely made page 3, under the headline, "Dreadful Disaster." Although I teased a bit of Proud Mary within this story, the perfect pairing for the song is a retelling of the disaster by band Sun Volt, an Americana band prone to folk ballads and alternative rock. Their song, simply titled Sultana, is my offering for this story. Right. Stories out of the way. I hope you've been paying attention, as now we're at the quiz. Right, pencils at the ready, and as usual, feel free to pause, rewind, just don't skip forward to the answers. And here we go. Question 1 from Monday. What was used to fool Marmaduke, the big game hunter, into believing he had found footprints of the Loch Ness Monster? Question 2 from Tuesday. How did the winner of the 1971 egg roll cheat? Question 3, Wednesday. who ranked first in the Beer Consumption by Country 2025 article. Question 4 from Thursday. Showing you never really can know your neighbours, what mundane act was the Golden State Killer performing when he was captured? Question 5 from Friday. How many words is the original title to Robinson Crusoe? Question 6, Saturday. How many helicopter bodies made a complete helistat? And finally, question 7 from Sunday. Who, as the bigger story, kept the SS Sultana off the front pages of newspapers? Right. Are we ready for some answers? Well, they're coming anyway. Monday. A hippo foot was used to fool Marmaduke. Answer 2 for Tuesday. The winner of the 1971 egg roll rolled a stone, not an egg. Answer 3 for Wednesday. China are the beer drinkers of the world, with 34 million tons drunk per year. Answer 4 for Thursday. The Golden State Killer was cooking a roast. Answer 5 for Friday. Robinson Crusoe has 69 words in its original title. Answer 6 for Saturday. There are 4 helicopters in a helistat. And Sunday. The bigger story was not Abraham Lincoln, but his killer, John Wilkes Booth. Which brings us to the end of another episode of This Day Not Year. I hope you fared well on the quiz, enjoyed the podcast overall, and hopefully learned something interesting along the way. If you're feeling extroverted, I'd appreciate it if you could share the podcast with friends or family, or give us a rating on your podcast app of choice. Also, while you're there, feel free to leave a comment too. Why not tell me what your favourite story from this week was? As ever, if you wish to get in contact over any heinous mistakes, or for any other reason, thisdaynotyear@gmail.com is how to reach me. And I apologise if I've missed replying to anyone. I only just found out some messages were going to spam. Sorry. Join me again next week as we cover from April 28th to May the 4th. Ooh, Star Wars Day. I've been your host, Adam. You've been listening to This Day Not Year, and I hope you have an historic week. Until next time.